The following program is for informational and educational purposes only. This program does not replace medical, mental health, or psychological diagnosis and treatment prescribed by your personal physician, psychologist, therapist, or other healthcare provider. Please consult your provider for diagnosis and care before beginning or changing any program or idea discussed.
Welcome to Psych Up Live with your host, Dr. Suzanne Phillips. This is the show that brings you a psychological perspective on common and current life issues. Here is Dr. Suzanne Phillips.
Welcome. I'm Suzanne Phillips, and thanks for joining me again on Psych Up Live. Today we have a very special show. As we face the 25th anniversary of 9/11, we are joined by Mary Fetchet, the co-founder and executive director of Voices Center for Resilience, the Voices of 9/11. Mary Fetchet will share her story as a mother who lost her 24-year-old son on 9/11, and as a clinical social worker who was faced with the unimaginable task of dealing with that and going forward to serve a lifeline, create a lifeline for thousands of 9/11 families, responders, and survivors. You wonder what it takes to be someone who has touched and helped thousands. To hear Mary Fetchet today is to be informed and inspired. Drawing on her experience as both one of the many parents and family members who lost loved ones, as well as being a clinical social worker, Mary immediately channeled her grief into purpose, building an organization dedicated to providing long-term services, mental health care, honoring the lives lost, and promoting national preparedness and support for international victims. Under her leadership, Voices became a lifeline for tens of thousands of 9/11 families, responders, survivors, including the 9/11 Living Memorial, an online archive of over 87,000 photos documenting the lives of all 2,977 victims. I can attest to the fact that families that I know have been thrilled to know those pictures are there. From testimony to advocacy before Congress, Mary Fetchet has never stopped recognizing the needs and fighting for answers for so many. Mary Fetchet, it is a great privilege to welcome you to Psych Up Live.
Well, thank you, Suzanne. I'm honored to be here today.
Okay, Mary, let's start by revisiting that day, that 9/11 day. Can I ask you where you were when you saw or heard that a plane had struck Tower 1, the North Tower?
Well, on 9/11, I was working at an outpatient mental health clinic, and I was sitting with my first client, and the phone rang. It was my husband who had talked with our son, Brad. Brad had called him to tell him that the North Tower had been hit and that he was in the South Tower and he was fine and expected to remain at work the remainder of the day. But he was very shaken, because he had seen somebody fall from the 90th floor all the way down as he left me in a message at home. So I ended the session and I walked with the clinical director into an adjoining building that had a large screen TV. And as we walked into the building, we saw the plane hit the South Tower. And so I had been at Brad's office a couple of times, but it was a 110-story building. And I was trying to figure out where his office was, if it was below or above the line of the flight, that airplane that hit the building. And so it just went on from there. My colleagues drove me home. I found the message that Brad had left me at home that I still have today. And then my friends, we live in New Canaan, Connecticut, a small community of 20,000 people. And my friends started arriving. News had spread that Brad was in the building, and they wanted to come and see if we had any information and how they could help.
So talk about being up close and personal to this. I mean, you were in it from the very, very beginning. At what point, Mary, did you feel I've got to do something that involves even addressing the losses of others? Um, I want to use my clinical skills. I want to use what it feels like to have that kind of loss to promote the better welfare and the care going forward. At what point did you make this decision, Mia?
Well, prior to 9/11, I had heard a woman speak, Marcia Kite, who had lost her daughter in the Oklahoma City bombing. And she showed this very powerful film of the Murray building before the bombing. And then, of course, as the tragedy unfolded, and it ended with them walking through the beautiful memorial that they have in Oklahoma City. But her message afterward was how the community suffered. They had higher incidence of depression, anxiety. They didn't call it PTSD back then, but in fact, PTSD. There were individuals that suffered from, um, substance abuse, job loss, divorce, and suicide. And so I think that background, understanding that and being part of our clinic's response team, really prepared me in a unique way to look at the community and how this tragedy had affected the community. So we had been in touch with our Congressman, Christopher Shays, and then Senator Lieberman's and Dodd in Connecticut. And what I realized immediately after was so many of the families in Connecticut were women that had lost their husbands. And there was no way they were going to go into New York City to the Family Assistance Center. They had to stay home and make sure that their children were taken care of. So through those offices, I was provided with the names of the families in Connecticut, and I called each of them and started hosting weekly meetings in her home. And so that's where it began. I met Beverly Eckerd, who had lost her husband. She didn't have children. She lived in an adjoining community. Our board member and board chair, Bonnie McEnany, now Bonnie McNamara, had also stopped by our home to introduce herself. We didn't know each other before 9/11, but it was with Bonnie then as well that we went to Washington for a bill signing. And, for the most part, Beverly and I started going in regularly to New York City to meet with uh, Senator Clinton, Mayor Giuliani, Governor Pataki, Elliot Spitzer, and others that were then tasked with, dealing with the devastation there, but also providing information and support to those that were impacted.
Mm. So that's the beginning of this powerful outreach that you did. And let's let our listeners know as we approach the 25th, what the degree of loss what the degree of loss is now, and how it's even we add to those numbers by those who have become ill from working on the site and from living close to the site. At this point, and we're going to go back to talk about some of the unbelievable programs you set up, but what do we have now in terms of numbers of people who have lost their lives as a result of this?
Well, there were 2,977 individuals that died on 9/11. And you have to remember, it was New York City at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and then the plane that crashed in the field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. But what we didn't anticipate, and those families were those individuals were from 93 countries. So it wasn't just New York City or the United States. 93 countries lost citizens that day. So it's very complicated for them as well to get information. But what we didn't anticipate at the time is the impact on the survivors and responders. There were over 400,000 individuals that survived the attacks. They lived, worked, or went to school in the area. Many of them went back to working at the stock exchange in organizations, corporations in Lower Manhattan. Or they went back to their apartments. They lived, in the area or went to school in the area. And then there were the 90,000 people that responded. So it was of course, the NYPD, the FDNY, the FBI, and other government agencies. But in addition to that, it was the people that work for the Red Cross or the Salvation Army or the iron workers or the electricians that went down first in search of remains, but also to clear the debris out of the World Trade Center so then they could build, what's now an absolutely magnificent memorial at the World Trade Center site.
Mm-hmm. And how many additional lives have been lost of that group that responded or lived in the area or worked in the area, or as many of the fire department and other helping, groups looked through the pile? How many additional lives have been lost?
Well, there have been 9,600 that have died since 9/11 of what we call 9/11 related illnesses. And it's, over 100 cancers, a lot of respiratory problems, and other conditions because of their exposure to the toxic air. But there's over 152,000 that are in treatment for some of those conditions. And we realized this very early on because, in 2005, we launched the 9/11 Living Memorial Project. The families wanted to commemorate. And, of course, the site they were still debating, about, what they were going to do with the memorial there, what the design was, and so on and so forth. But when we were meeting with families, we collected over the years 87,000 photographs. While the museum was being built, we traveled around. We even went to London to meet with the British families there, and we organized and scanned and collected over 87,000 photographs that are online on our website. And when the museum was built, we were able to provide, with the family's permission, copies of the photographs, the digital copies for their exhibit, the In Memoriam exhibit. But when we started that project too, we started documenting stories of responders and survivors. And we noticed at that point, first and foremost, many of them had PTSD. They were exposed to and saw and witnessed things that, no one should witness or be exposed to. But we also noticed that, people would report that they had developed cancer. A lot of them had this horrible cough, which you only had to be down at the site to realize, the air quality was not good. And that would be related to the cough, would be related to their exposure. So we realized at that point, but the responders really took it upon themselves to start advocating for medical and mental health care for the responders and then the survivors. So the clinical centers that were set up now provide medical and mental health care for anyone that has a condition related to their exposure, whether it's a survivor or a responder. And so, it's, if not saving lives, it's extending their life because of the treatment that they're now receiving. And I really credit, John Fiel and many of the individuals that traveled to Washington to advocate for that care. And that's going to go through 2090. I think the amazing thing is the dedication of these clinical directors and the staff that are working at these medical centers. They know if you have one condition, what the other condition they may need to be on the lookout for a condition that may be a result of that. So they have an understanding like no other of the care that's needed for these individuals.
Now, it's extraordinary. It's extraordinary not only how people have suffered, but how you were able to respond, and these ancillary groups that work with you are able to respond. Now, the group that I've been most involved with is the Voices of 9/11. Tell us a little bit about that, and correct me if I'm wrong. When the Voices of 9/11 has a program, those who worked on the pile, who became sick, or who lost someone who became sick working, they're welcomed into the groups or the programs that are run, much as the survivors are. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. I think in the beginning, there was a real focus on separating the groups. And we saw that in our early groups that we had in our home, before we formally started the organization and had our first office space, that the parents did not want to talk in front of the siblings. The parents with small children had different needs than the parents with, older children. We didn't want the witnesses or people that survived or people that responded to be sharing their stories with victims' families, because we were concerned about what they would be exposed to. But what we found in these peer support groups really immediately after is that shared experience is so important to healing, because they can talk to somebody else that has a shared experience and understands all the complicated issues that we had to navigate in a way that no one else can. And that, I would say that's even related to the families of those individuals. I think a responder can talk to a responder in a way that they can't necessarily talk to their family member. And and I think over time, there was a rush for people to get over it. Well, it's not something that you get over, you live with it. And people go through this and heal in their own time, but it's really those relationships that are so critical to the healing.
Well, the two aspects that you capture in those groups is one is that to be very badly traumatized is to feel isolated, that you're not part of the world or anyone else. And the gathering of people in a group is an antidote to that. Because you and I have seen people say, what he said is what I feel. And there's the ability to use the power of the group to find the words, to not be ashamed of the suffering, to find people who understand you. And we know the other piece is narrating the trauma is the way to heal trauma. Because at the time that someone faces the unthinkable, they don't have words. But we've seen with the groups that you've run an incredible ability to have people share the words, validate each other, respect each other's differences. So your program, The Voices of 9/11, is an incredible medium for healing and connecting.
Well, I would agree with that. And the thing that we've realized actually is that, in any tragedy, the first focus is on the victims and the people that survived were there at the time or injured. And typically, the people that survived would be the next group. But in this case, because the responders were the advocates, and we're out front advocating for those services, the survivors in many ways were overlooked. And so when somebody survives a tragedy like that, people respond that, they're lucky, they survived, but they don't feel lucky. And so it really eliminates their, I think, engagement with other people to share what their personal experience was. In this year, we've received over 3,000 new people that have contacted us for the first time asking for assistance or support. And many of them are survivors that have never talked about it before.
Mm.
So this is the 25th anniversary, and we're seeing an increase in the individuals that are coming forward and wanting to share their story, for the most part, for the first time.
Mm. Mm. And when you sit with the groups, as we recently did a program, there is such a feeling of a connection and wanting to know the other person's story. And for someone to want to know your story is to make you feel valid again, is to make you feel like you matter. And your programs make that happen. They're really remarkable in terms of people feeling safe and people feeling like these people are my people, they get it. And they're very, correct me on this, they're very welcoming of someone who's a survivor of serious illness because they lived near the pile or worked on the pile. I mean, there's no competitive suffering. Everybody seems very open to extending their heart and their arms to anyone who has come through the 9/11 story and has reached the 25th year and is suffering.
Well, and I would say that as much as we kept them separate in the very beginning, now it's one community. And we're finding that the family members are very compassionate and comforting to people, that witnessed or survived or responded and now are suffering the consequences of their exposure to these toxic air. When we first started the groups, we had to think very creatively. As I mentioned, 93 countries lost citizens that day, and there was no way to really connect them. I mean, we weren't going to be able to meet in person. And so we came up with the concept of running our groups by teleconference call. And we did that for, oh gosh, over a decade, until the one gift out of COVID has been Zoom. And now we've been able to connect people in a way that they can see each other and feel like they're really able to share their story.
Mm. We're going to take a brief break. You've been listening to Psych Up Live. We've been lucky enough to have Mary Fetchet with us. Mary Fetchet is the creator of Voices of 9/11, and she's the mother of one of the young men who died on that day, and she's touched thousands of people in the past 25 years. She's done more, she's written more, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. We'll be right back.
You are listening to Psych Up Live. Join in our conversation today. Send an email to radiohostphillips@gmail.com. Now, back to Psych Up Live.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to Psych Up Live. I'm here with Mary Fetchet, and she's done an unbelievable job over the past 25 years with regards to the September 11 attacks and the goal of trying to prevent that from ever happening again. Mary, one of the things that we were discussing on the break was I guess it's inevitable that as you looked very closely at all aspects of this, you were very devoted to it. You were working with everyone from government to, our FDNY to physicians, validating the 9/11 related illnesses, that you took an important advocacy position. And what were your goals and what has unfolded from that?
Well, when we started the organization, we wanted to accomplish three goals. One was to provide the information and support to those that were impacted. The second was to commemorate the lives that were lost, and that's why we created the 9/11 Living Memorial that now has 87,000 photographs that the families contributed, and we've provided the copies of that archive to the 9/11 Museum, and it's in their in memoriam exhibit. But we also wanted to make sure there was a proper memorial. And so I was involved with a group of families that really communicated what we wanted in the memorial. We wanted, water to sound out the busyness of New York City. We wanted to be able to touch the names. We wanted the footprints of the building to be preserved. We wanted the survivor staircase to be included. And we wanted the remains. There was a big debate among the families if the remains should be like the tomb of the unknown soldier, where it would be on street level, or if it would be, incorporated inside the memorial. And that's where it is. That's what they've decided, where it is. One of the other things related to that was working with a medical examiner. I think there were 20,000 body parts that were found. And still today, there's 1,100 families that have never been notified of remains. I think Frank and I have been notified, 5 or 6 times of Brad's remains over the years. And they've made a promise from the very start to continue to use, advanced DNA technology. I think they still have 7,000 body parts that have yet to be identified. So we work very closely still today with the medical examiner. We also wanted to make sure it didn't happen again. I mean, I felt, if not prevented, we could have mitigated, the loss of life that day. And it was just early on reading the New York Times, and you'd see that the FBI knew this and another government agency knew that, and they weren't communicating within or among their agencies. And so I was asked by a group of family members to speak at a rally in Washington, D.C. in June of 2002. And it was held at a park across from the Capitol building. And I'd never written a speech before. I knew nothing about politics, but I did know that I didn't want it to happen again. And so, after the rally that we held, there were many senators and congressmen that were there. We started, meeting, going through the congressional offices and meeting with congressmen and senators' offices. And I was struck by the pushback. I had one Southern gentleman tell me that I was not his constituent, and besides, 9/11 was a New York thing. Well, that was shocking and horrifying to me. And so that led to really about 4 or 5 years where we were traveling to Washington, D.C., first to get the commission established. Then once they were established and released the report, to make sure that was legislated. And then the next cycle to make sure it was funded. And then the next cycle to make sure it was implemented. So I was also felt very strongly about promoting preparedness, because I do feel that Brad would be alive today if in fact they were better prepared. If they had left the building after the first plane hit, he would be alive today, and many others would be alive today. So I advocated for September to be designated as National Preparedness Month, and continue to promote preparedness. So the victims' families or responders or survivors can become an important part of the advocacy work that can push things forward. And there's a credibility and a moral authority that we had to be able to do that. But I have to say, it was exhausting work. You know, when I look back over the course of the last 25 years, you know, the time that I spent away from my family when I should have been home, you know, with them, you know, but it would have been harder for me to look the other way and think it was going to be taken care of.
And I imagine they're very proud of what you did, Mary. I mean, to have someone say to you, "You're not my constituent," and it's a New York, I mean, that probably motivated you more. But you're really letting us know this has been no easy task for 25 years. You, your husband, and others who have fought, but primarily you guys are leaders on this. It it makes a difference in people's lives. Just when they see those photos up, I know what they have said, because it makes them feel like, so he mattered. People will see him. It's enormously important to people. Now, one of the other things you talk about is a victim-centered approach. Mary, you wrote about that. What is it that you are driving at with that?
Well, I was a clinical social worker, and I guess I had some training in trauma, but not to the extent that I really knew what trauma-informed care was. But I was a victim, family member, and you know, and we've dealt with tens of thousands of victims' family members, responders, and survivors. So I think what we developed really from the start is something that no one else was doing. You know, the Family Assistance Center is there for a very short period of time. Agencies were duplicating efforts. There were hundreds of government agencies and thousands of service providers, but it wasn't, they weren't providing continuity of care, and they weren't able to advocate on our behalf. And they didn't understand the complicated issues that we had to navigate. So really, when we started the organization, we looked at all of that. So our work, you know, in the first year and still today, is our commitment to providing continuity of care. That was something as a clinician I thought was very critical, you know, prior to 9/11. But that's something that we've maintained. You know, there's a lot of organizations that have come and gone. The government's moving on to the next tragedy. And we have this 9/11 population that's hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people that lost loved ones or are related to the responders and survivors. You know, I really feel that from the start, I recognized that there weren't going to be long-term needs, and to provide that continuity that we know what happened on the first day. We know what's happened on the 25th year. And we've been that common thread where other organizations, you know, very committed to helping the 9/11 community. But we've had 4 special masters, we've had 3 presidents and CEOs, at the 9/11 Memorial Museum. We've had three um, medical directors at the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. You know, the trial in Guantanamo is still going on. The lawsuit for the Saudis in Iran is still going on. And so it's not over. It's, you know, continuing on. And I think we have now the next generation of people that we need to support.
But it's almost unusual, and you're to be commended. You have not stopped. Voices has not stopped. They have not forgotten. And that's amazing. That's amazing.
Well, it's you know, it's such meaningful work. We have met such wonderful people that, you know, both the individuals that we're supporting, but also the individuals like yourself that have supported the work of the organization. You know, you, Suzanne, and your colleagues at the American Group Psychotherapy Association, the wonderful individuals that are leading some of those organizations that I spoke about. You know, they're dedicated and commitment to doing the work.
So I think I need to ask you, if someone's listening and they're thinking, I didn't know about this organization. I want to see if I can get help, or I want to get help for my brother, or I want to find out how to get more really informed medical advice. How would they proceed, Mary? What
Well,
would be the
they can
steps?
go to our website, voicescenter.org, and you know, it's 25 years of information on the website.
It's
The thing
fabulous.
I would mention, we have the 25th anniversary coming up. We're having our 25th symposium. We started holding that on the first anniversary at the Marriott Downtown Hotel, which is just a couple of blocks from the 9/11 Memorial and Museum. That's 3 days this year. The first day is law enforcement and counterterrorism, experts that will talk about, you know, what they've learned since 9/11 and how national security has advanced as a result. But then on the 9th and the 10th, it is going to be focused on the 9/11 community, the families, responders, and survivors, and we'll have many of our partners that are continuing to support the community that will be providing updates and being able to meet with the individuals. But we have people like Secretary Clinton, who was, you know, just 8 months a senator on 9/11. And we've had, I think that was one of the first meetings I had in New York City after our son died. And she has been a constant support of the 9/11 community. We have Governor Pataki, who's going to be speaking at our luncheon that we're hosting for the families on September 11th after the reading of the names. We're partnering with StoryCorps, and we're going to be starting another project with them and creating those oral histories, and they're experts in the field of really documenting those important conversations that, you know, will be donated to the 9/11 Memorial, also the Library of Congress, and then on our 9/11 Living Memorial website.
So if people go to your website, they could find out what is happening this year on the anniversary and the many different programs that are being offered.
Sure. And you know, and the symposium is free. It's held in person, but it's also available via live stream.
Oh,
So if they
great,
register, I think last year we had people from 28 states and 12
great,
countries
great.
participate. So I mean, that's really wonderful that we can communicate all of this information, you know, around the world.
Mm. Well, the American Group Psychotherapy Association, we say that people heal in groups because trauma shuts you off from everything you ever knew and anyone you ever held on to. So to restore that, when you put people back in groups as you have done for 25 years, if they feel restored, they feel hope, they feel cared for, they feel they're not alone. And so what you've done with Voices of 9/11 over these 25 years, Mary, is really nothing short of remarkable. And I mean, to just hear you, it's been a life commitment now that so many people have benefited from.
Mm. Well, it's been an honor. And one thing I would mention though, Suzanne, because of our work in preparedness, uh, we changed the name of the organization really around the time of COVID to Voices Center for Resilience. And
Okay, I like it.
we've conducted research over the years. One of the things that we found, I think it was around the 13th anniversary, we were received a grant to develop best practices, and we created a toolkit based on we went to Oklahoma City, Virginia Tech, Northern Illinois University, and Tucson, Arizona after the Gabby Giffords shooting. And we created a toolkit that's online. We've received a couple of grants from the Canadian government and did research on the long-term bereavement issues. And we conducted that with 9/11 families around the 15th anniversary. That paper has been published. And then we received a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and created a training, which has then evolved now into a victim-centered approach training. And I'd go so as far as we've made a lot of progress in law enforcement and counterterrorism and in informing them as leaders how they can work with victims after a tragedy. But what I realized over the years is that we also need a survivor-centered approach and a responder-centered approach and a community-centered approach. Because what we've seen over the years is this rippling effect that a tragedy happens and you're focused on the people that are directly impacted. But over time, the needs of the community as a whole surface. And that's what we've seen with 9/11.
Well, it fits in, and it's wonderful that it's called the Voices Center for Resilience, because, as you know, it's almost remarkable at times to see how resilient these people are. Yourself and your husband and your family included, it's extraordinary. But when you are surrounded by other people who have also suffered, but now are able to fight for what they need and speak up and not feel that there's something wrong with them or they need to hide or they can't step forward. When you feel brave enough and surrounded by people who believe in your resilience, that's healing. That's what happens. And that's so healing. I love the change
Well,
to the
and the other
Voices
thing
Center.
I'd say is, we found people are resilient. Certainly at different levels of resilience, but some of the families have created, foundations and organizations. They've built memorials. They've, taken on projects. They've created scholarships in memory of their loved ones, and they're giving back. And we found in our research that giving back is very healing. And I know a lot of
Absolutely.
people say to me that we created the organization in memory of Brad, and there's nothing further from the truth.
That's right.
It's not because of Brad. It's not for Brad. It's because of Brad and because of all the others that were impacted that
Yep.
day. They suffered a horrific death, and their families and the responders and survivors deserve the support that they need to heal.
We're going to have to stop. I think our listeners, everyone out there, you see who Mary is, Mary Fetchet, and the enormous effort and the work that she's accomplished with many others over the years. If you know someone, if you yourself have suffered as a result of 9/11, by all means, go to the Voices Center of Resilience online and find help, find connection. It's an incredible resource. Mary Fetchet, I thank you for all that you've done. It's been an honor to know you. And thanks for coming on to speak to our audience at Psych Up Live.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Okay, until next time, take care, be safe, and be listening.
Thank you for tuning in to Psych Up Live. Please join Dr. Suzanne Phillips for another edition of our programming next Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time on the Voice America Variety Channel. Until then, be well and be listening.